Hey folks, courage is in rare supply today. Winston Churchill said courage, rightly esteemed, is the first human quality because it is the quality which guarantees all others. Today we're talking to a courageous pastor from the land down under that is taking a stand against the LGBT movement in Australia. Very soon, the laws in that country could have him and many others within his church in jail. We will hear the story of how he fled Egypt under persecution from Islam, only to face a new kind of persecution in Australia in the name of pride. You don't want to miss this. Pastor Andrew Sedra on the Give Me Liberty podcast, starting now. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Give Me Liberty podcast. I'm joined by lead pastor and founder of Echo Church in Australia, the land down under, Pastor Andrew Sedra. Welcome, brother. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's an honor to be with you today and kind of get to all things the Bible, the gospel, culture, Christianity, church and state, and all the sea of false ideas that we find ourselves facing at this point of time.
Yeah, it's a crazy time we're living in. I just think, when we think about the time and the hour, we don't choose it. God chooses it, but we have to be faithful in the moment. So I think I go back to that story of Esther for such a time as this. And I tell you, man, I appreciate so much what you're doing at Echo Church, things that I've seen on social media. Social media has become the public square for so much information getting out there. Certainly, the enemy loves to use it, and I think that the sons of righteousness should also use it. And so I appreciate what you're doing. I just wanted to talk a little bit. We were talking about a little bit off camera, but about your background. You're not an Aussie originally by birth, but you got there. And tell us a little bit about that, your story, your testimony, and background.
Yeah, so I didn't plan to be here at all. God, we just had a story for us. So I was kind of born in the Middle East. My dad is a pastor. He was preaching, converting Muslims to Christians, planting churches. And then it kind of came to a point where a particular person that he baptized, he converted her from Islam to Christianity, that her family and the government wanted to kill us. So it was a really God destined moment because my dad was already in Australia. So he ended up knowing and he stayed, and we kind of, as a family, ended up going to Thailand, escaping there. And then we kind of went through the process and we came to Australia as religious refugees. So that's kind of my story. But coming to Australia, I kind of realized the persecution just started. Like we kind of, as a young person, I remember moving and I thought God delivered us from persecution. But then as I'm getting older, I realized God prepared me in Egypt. It wasn't it wasn't really deliverance. It was deliverance what is more of a preparation. And you kind of come to the West, and it's really interesting because what's happening in the West at the moment, and I've been really, it's mind blowing, is that the West is moving from Jerusalem to Babylon. Whether people like it or not, it's a fact. Babylon is when the people of God are not in power, they're not the majority, and where whatever they believe is not cultural. Jerusalem, though, is awesome. It's when you have King David, and where I grew up, we always grew up under Babylon. We never knew what does it mean to for the government to be on your side, for the media to be on your side, for you to go to court and get justice and truth, for you to be able to have the freedom of speech and to preach the gospel, for you to be able to even invite people to church. Like coming to Australia, one of the reasons I planted a church is because I'm like, this is crazy. Like you can actually plant a church. That's crazy. You can actually preach a gospel. You can actually invite people to church. So where I was born, you couldn't do that. You can do that in the church, but you cannot do that outside of the church walls. It's illegal. So yeah, so it was coming from Babylon, I thought I was coming to Jerusalem, the city of peace. But then in Australia, we are in Babylon at the moment. We could see it with COVID. COVID was not people. A lot of people thought COVID changed the game. I don't think COVID changed the game. I think COVID revealed what was already there.
Yes. Amen.
Um,
Oh, wholeheartedly
I
agree.
think, yeah, it's this is the issue as you kind of, and now you're looking backwards and you're like, COVID was a moment of revelation, not a moment of change. Some people are trying to get back to normal. We're not getting back to normal. 2020 is a game changer. We're not getting back to normal. Yeah. So now being a voice here in the wilderness, like Echo, that was kind of the inspiration when we started. God was like, "I'm a voice shouting in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord." I didn't know that when we started in 2017, as a church, as a Bible study. But now in the last few years, I was like this was God's design. It wasn't my idea at all. And then meeting here, we are in Australia. Secularism is not just outside of church; it's actually in the church. Like, according to a lot of pastors in Australia, people like me are considered radical, right wing, all this Christian nationalists, all this type of terms that they chuck of you because progressive Christianity Australia is the cultural norm. You guys in America, you guys have a good balance and tension of ideas. Australia is like a little cult when it comes to the way it dealt with COVID, but also theologically. We don't have a strong the Pentecostal church in Australia. In Australia, I wouldn't say on the world in the world, it's progressive and it doesn't even know it because it's like when you have been in something for so long, and now you think it's like the fish in the tank of a worldview. It's unable to see beyond the water. And in Australia, we got pretty much most 90% of churches, at least, are progressive, but they don't know what progressive even means because we have been so demoralized and brainwashed school institutions, and we are geographically far away from you guys. From we're far away from Europe. We're far away from everything. Like we had a politician that won the election a few months ago over the slogan, "The vaccine saved lives." So we are here living in the delusion of 2021 and 2020. So that type of delusion is in the church as well. So they look at America and they call it right wing politics, but I'm from the Middle East and I tell them that's not right wing politics. That's actually reality. There is a culture war, whether you like it or not. It always has been there. It will always be there. Um, you can be delusional about it, but the problem is, as I said, going back. Sorry, I've talked a lot. Is that is that me coming from Egypt to understand how Babylon works, and I come here and people are acting like we are in peace where we are in war. And that's how false prophets arise. They speak peace when we are in war. And that's how in when Christianity is systematically becoming criminalized and people are asleep. And hopefully by the grace of God, as Echo Church, we'll be able to wake them up before it's too late. It's as you read Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you'll kind of understand one of the biggest reasons Nazi Germany risen was because of the silent positive church. That's the that's actually what was called silent positive church. And they preach salvation without sin, revival without repentance. It's pretty scary. I read it. I'm like, oh my God, this is literally the progressive church right now. And how crazy is that some guy from the 1940s who lived in a different era, the exact same issue that was in the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, is now in the West, where they're not agreeing that we're moving from Jerusalem to Babylon, which means we're going to be Daniels. There's going to be fire that we're going to have to go through. like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There's going to be moments where we're going to say no. There's going to be political cases. There's going to be tension because of what we worship and who we worship. But more than anything, we're going to go to the lion's den and God will deliver us. But we have to agree that we're not in Jerusalem and we have to stop acting like we are in Jerusalem. We are in
Yeah.
Babylon. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so well said. I mean, there's a lot there. When you unpack the book of Jeremiah, there were these prophets in Israel that were trying to prophesy that God's deliverance, His salvation, and they were trying to say, these were false prophets, by the way, but that there would be peace, that the yoke of Babylon would be broken, that God was going to usher in a restoration. But instead, no, God wanted them to undergo this kind of reproof, this kind of chastisement, this judgment that came from God. God was, in many ways, vindicating His name. They had been disobedient. If you go to Jeremiah chapter 29, I think it's in the verse or the chapter before in chapter 28, there was a false prophet who falsely prophesied God's going to break this yoke of Babylon on Israel. Then Jeremiah says in 29, he says, no. Not only is that not going to happen, you're going to stay in Babylon, but you're supposed to serve God, Yahweh, righteously while you live in Babylon. And then he goes into for I know the plans I have for you to prosper you, not to harm you, to give a hope and a future. But when he's saying that, this is not a prosperity theology. This is a theology of faithfulness. And all we're to do in those moments is to live and act faithfully, and to God be the results and the glory. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we're heading into hard times. I think the hard times could be a long time. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote Gulag Archipelago, believed that the Soviet Union the reign of that evil empire could last 1,000 years. He really did believe that they could sustain themselves for 1,000 years. He never believed that it would happen in his lifetime, that they would fall. That he would live to see the fall of the Soviet Empire. What we're seeing spiritually and politically all around us could outlast our lives. It could, but the church is to be faithful in this moment and to stand up. So I really appreciate how you characterize that Babylon versus Jerusalem. Here in the United States, we have this long history. We have this current debate within I would say, the faithful church, those who are, who believe the gospel, who are preaching it faithfully. You have those who have this kind of premillennial, but it's not really premillennial in terms of eschatology. It's more of a posture of premillennial pessimism. So everything's going to get progressively worse. And then you have the other side, whereas it's postmillennial, again, more of a posture than just an eschatology, but postmillennial in terms of positivism or whatever. Optimism, I should say it that way. Optimism, where what needs to happen is the church needs to remain faithful. It needs to plod along. We need to stop the lie of secular neutrality. We need to take education more seriously. We need to take cultural engagement more seriously, political engagement, and we need to be committed to action. Here at Liberty University, Dr. Jerry Falwell Sr., our founder, he founded this institution over 50 years ago. He not only founded a school, he founded a church, and then he also founded a political organization in the late 1970s called the Moral Majority. And one of the things that he was trying to do is mobilize and rally Christians of many stripes to engage the public square. His biggest concern was over America losing its sense of self, this cultural amnesia, not understanding what kind of nation it was founded as a Christian nation committed to the highest principles of freedom. And so here we have it. We've inherited so much, and we have squandered and have kind of like the prodigal son. We're this prodigal nation that has squandered all of these riches, the riches of freedom, not just the riches of wealth and power and prestige, but the riches of freedom we've squandered, and have not understood that they all came from God. And so here we are, brother. I appreciate that. I have pastor friends in Canada, and the one thing they say is this. It was Jacob Rayom. He's in Canada, and he said, I think it's Trinity Bible Chapel. He said to me, the difference between Canada and the United States, Canada was granted freedom. It's an inherited freedom. The United States fought and won freedom. You, as Americans, have, at least in your legal and political tradition, a resistance to tyrants. America was founded as a nation who fought a tyrant and secured freedom. And so then we understood it. Now we're losing sight of that. We're forgetting that. Many Americans today are establishmentarian. Many Protestants today don't understand what protest is all about. And so they just sort of accept this tyranny and say, well, we just need to do whatever the magistrate says. We just need to do whatever the legal authorities say. They don't even understand representative government.
It's crazy because one thing like crazy about leftism or progressive ideology is that it's extremely genius from a demonic end, because what it does is that truth is the only pathway to freedom, and sin is a pathway to slavery. So if you're able to get a generation to celebrate and accept and tolerate pride and all this type of sin, what you by nature, without you even trying, you end up creating a generation that values slavery, because freedom needs self-control. Slavery is really the concept of you lack self-control, so you need someone to restrain you. So by nature, the problem we're facing is that, biblically speaking, freedom is a biblical principle. It's the biblical principle. The gospel is literally called the gospel of liberty. It's the gospel of freedom. God has a goal of your freedom. The first thing God said to Adam is, you may freely eat from all the fruits of the garden, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There is this real life God given value of individual freedom. And it's super important. I think I value a lot, particularly the freedom of speech. Growing in a nation, Egypt, for example, where freedom of speech was not a thing. You were not allowed to share your beliefs in the public square. We had blasphemy laws. We had sometime where the government will come to our house and search our house for documents or books that critiqued Islam. You were not allowed to critique Islam on your computer, on your iPad, on a text, on your phone, in a book. We literally had to hide our books. So watching the West not value one of the most precious things in the world is freedom. And that's a problem. The only people that don't value freedom, I figured out, the people that already had it. Um, During COVID, we had the Anglican Church in Australia, which they're radical. Not sure why. Again, I think leftism, and I'm not being racist. I think leftism is kind of a white, rich, elitist thing. As I'm getting older, I'm realizing it's a really white thing, because as a refugee and all refugees I talk to, freedom for us is huge. It's huge. It's like the freedom of speech, the freedom to exercise your belief, the freedom to be able to say what you want, the freedom to think, the freedom to say what you actually think, feel on every side, left wing politics, right? It's really massive. And in Australia, one of the biggest things that we find, the Anglican Church, particularly one of the major theologians, his name is John Dixon. Anglicanism, I'm trying to understand it, but it's a really weird ideology. He said Christianity's value is not freedom, it's to love thy neighbor. That's why we should be locked up and we should get the vaccine. And I looked at him, I'm like, this is so easy when you are sitting on your tower of academics with your 500 degrees and you're born in the West when you're free. Say that to people who were never able to go to church because they were born Muslim. Say that to people who could not gather because they didn't have the right registration. Say that to pastors who had to have underground church. That's nuts, man. Like that's crazy. You literally disvalue freedom because you have it. You have had it given to you all the days of your life. That you don't value. I remember having friends in Egypt and they would critique Christianity and make fun of it. And I couldn't even talk back to them as a young person. So what people fail to realize, freedom is the most valuable commodity after God, the gospel, and salvation. Freedom is so precious and it's so Christian because without freedom, you can't choose what God to worship. You will choose it, but the fact is, you like when freedom is not there, you people are intimidated from pursuing truth, and that's how dictatorship in the Middle East. That's really is the technique against Christianity. It's intimidation. You can't talk about it. You can't preach about it. If you preach about it, you're going to go to jail, or we're going to torture you, or we're going to kill you, or we're going to kill your family, or we're going to behead your kids. There's so many ways of intimidation. So freedom is so massive, and you will only realize it when you lose it. And what people fail to realize, when you lose it, you're not going to get it back.
Yeah.
Um,
Amen.
Power is powerful. That's why truth is the foundation of freedom, and truth is the only pathway to freedom. And a culture that doesn't value truth, it doesn't value freedom. And that's why Jesus said, "And you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And I'm like, freedom is really precious because we value truth. Yeah, I think freedom is not a right wing concept. It's not an American thing. I really think freedom is a biblical thing, and it's so awesome. The idea that you can debate, you can speak, you can put your idea into the test, you can freely choose to change, to move. You can freely choose to start a church, to talk to someone, to be on the street. Like in Australia, uh, uh, we have crazy things like coming down the pipeline. Like right now in Australia, in Melbourne, Melbourne is in the state of Victoria. It's kind of like the LA of Australia. It is illegal right now in Melbourne for a pastor to pray for a homosexual. If in Melbourne you pray for a homosexual that they would defeat their sin, a pastor can get at least 5 years jail and around 50K fine for praying. See, we don't have in Australia freedom of speech. It's America is the only country in the world that has freedom of speech in their
And we have.
constitution. Yeah.
Let me say this real fast. This is interesting because you go back to something you said about freedom. True freedom. It's birthed out of truth. Truth is the pathway to freedom. Sin is the pathway to slavery. We're seeing this all with the LGBTQ plus agenda. Satan wants us in bondage to sin. Christ wants us to have life more abundantly, but it's life in him. It's life in his name. It is not our righteousness. It's an alien righteousness that comes from Jesus Christ. What's really interesting is you look in the Old Testament, right after Israel was delivered from the bondage of slavery from Pharaoh, they are ushered into the wilderness. There's a period of about 400 years from the time they're liberated to the time they're given a king. In that 400-year period, this is the time of Joshua and the conquest into Canaan and the judges and all of that. During that period of time, Israel was a republic, and they had to submit to God's law, the law of Moses. They had to undergo the covenant, the covenant promise. They had to love their neighbor, practice the Shema, teach these truths, bind them on their forehead, bind them on their heart, right? They had to remind their children constantly of the liberation from Egypt, out of bondage and slavery into freedom. At some point, though, Israel goes into sin, into a kind of sin that is the same pattern that you see in Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 21. You see a violation of the covenant. You see priests who have concubines and prostitutes, right? You see where Israel is practicing all kinds of idolatry and pagan worship. And then you get to the end of Judges, like the climax of Judges is that There is no king in Israel, and everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. You come to Samuel, and at that point in Samuel, uh, uh, when he's raised up, Israel says, we want a king like the other nations. We want a government like the other nations. God says to Samuel, they've not rejected you, they've rejected me
Mhm.
as what? King.
King,
So
come
all of
on.
a sudden, they are incapable of self-governance. They're incapable of being a republic, being a nation that is free. Now, God had it intended, and I'll be very clear, always that Israel would have a king, but a righteous king. So he sends his son. That's the king. And the king is God. Um, but Israel was not capable because of their sin. They were not capable of righteous rule. They were not capable of self-governance. They had to have an authority figure placed over them. They had to have a rod and a yoke of burden placed upon them. And the point is that we needed rescue not only from a political enemy, but from a spiritual enemy. That's the whole point. So basically, just understanding Israel was a republic. They basically lost freedom because they lost a sense of what it was to submit to the will of God, the law of God. And what we find in that spiritual context is very much a mirror to what we're seeing today. America, there's many other countries. There was a Christian foundation. There was a political reality, but the political reality was not the foundation. The spiritual reality was always the foundation for freedom and self-governance. So what we're seeing today is, just as you say, the countries that are impoverished, they're enslaved, they don't have a lot of political freedom. You look at the spiritual condition of that country, and it's oftentimes worse. And that is what's leading to that. It's a derived understanding. So the real fountain of all freedom, as you said earlier, it's Jesus Christ. It's the
Jesus Christ,
gospel.
there's no other way.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no way to do it. So I agree that there is this steady diet of licentious living, carnality, of pursuing fleshly desires, and what that is doing is it's giving birth to a culture of death and a culture of enslavement.
It's mind blowing. It's I look at it in Australia. Australia is a secular, pragmatic nation, and people do not value freedom. Like for example, before we go to Pride, um, people in Australia got baptized so that they can go to the pub. We got sold in Australia the vaccination. If you get the vaccine, you can go to the pub. It was so simple. And as I said to you before, Australia is probably 20 to 30 years ahead of you guys. We are now at a moment where both the right and the left are progressive. We just conducted the study at the moment. 44% of people identify as religious or Christian. So we have already passed the 50 mark. So we're in a really dangerous spot because once it goes under 50, from a identifying as Christian perspective, you start to see the aggression of secularism. We don't have the numbers in Australia. We don't. So at the moment, we're seeing I think America is still on 77% Christian or identify as religious.
Claim, yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
are in the claim on 44. So at the moment, we're seeing this monster of secularism or neo-communism, whatever you want to call it, rise against Christianity through the LGBTQ religion. So right now in Australia, the laws are crazy. We have, so as I said before, in Melbourne, and it's passing here soon in New South Wales. It's called the anti conversion bill, and it pretty much criminalizes pastors and leaders. Particularly, it says in the bill Christian, conservative, evangelical pastors who pray or disciple one on one, gay or trans, with any sort of teaching that is not affirming. You go to jail and you get fined. We have in Australia, it's an LGBTQ commission where they can literally fill a form on a website against a pastor in Melbourne, and they will go and investigate the pastor for crimes against the LGBTQ. They have their own police.
Incredible. And so this basically is a new kind of civil and civic religion. It's a new kind of inquisition. I go back to George Orwell. There was the ministry of truth, which was propaganda, and then the ministry of love. And the ministry, this very much echoes the kind of ministry of love that you see in 1984, where it's a mask for total tyranny and transgression against a people. So, talking a little bit about your role as pastor at a church now, that is standing against this. You're having to stand your ground, and you're having to preach against this. What risks do you bear
Well, at
right
this
now?
for the net for the but from what it looks like, I'm sweet until the end of this year. So I don't know this type of laws. New South Wales, where I live, it's like the Texas of Australia. Again, it's really progressive. Like we just had Pride. We had in February Sydney World Pride Mardi Gras. It was a 1 month funded by the state, $3.6 million. We had hundreds and thousands of people, of gay people, LGBTQ, come from across the whole world to visit. So Sydney is like the pilgrimage, the holy pilgrimage for the gay community. Um, in Sydney, we're pretty much Mecca, if metaphorically speaking. So we are the Mecca of the progressive sex religion of the LGBTQ, where the LGBTQ stuff was everywhere. We had fire trucks, policemen, gay policemen, like, and I'm talking like a police will walk around with a gay like thingy. So if you experience LGBTQ hate, you'll go to them. They're specifically designed. LGBTQ fire trucks, all the major national things were lightened with the LGBTQ flag. Our government spent $3.6 million to celebrate, and they literally had and there were like millions of them walking on Harbour Bridge as a sign of love and tolerance and diversity. But we are living in Australia in a moment where the LGBTQ sex religion is the official religion of the state. And because they claim to hold love, the ministry of love, then they claim to have the truth because they're loving. So they are both the ministry of truth and the ministry of love. And if you speak against them, you are the definition of hate speech. Not just that, a few weeks ago, we had Melbourne, the actual premier, which is the governor for us, the premier of the state. He had a drag queen show for kids in the parliament. So a drag queen, gender indoctrination, the critical queer theory happening in the parliament. Imagine in the White House having a drag queen, a team of drag queens, and little kids coming, and then your governor, DeSantis, he wouldn't do that, but imagine in the Parliament House smiling and saying, "This is the new modern Australia." We had the prime minister march, he the first prime minister ever to go to the gay parade, march on Harbour Bridge with like 100,000 LGBTQ movement. And he said, "This is the new Australia." He said, "We need to move from tolerating difference to celebrating difference." So this is really important. He doesn't just want us to tolerate sin, he wants us to celebrate sin. So our secular sex worshipping culture, um, they're not after tolerance. When people say just tolerate them and live and let live, I'm like, no, no, no. You need to understand. This is not. They're not after tolerance. They're after complete submission. You have to bow down to the state, and they're using the state. And I tell Americans that you got to be careful. All my empathy, compassion, Christians, particularly, I would say baby boomer pastors, because they have no idea what is coming in for them. Like I'm a millennial, so I have a lot of connection to Gen Z. And funny enough, our church have multiplied by double in the last 3 years, particularly with young people, Gen Z and millennials, because they are so interested in what does God have to say about sexuality, identity, gender. They're not interested in your old, honestly, like it's crazy when you're preaching Bible with that culture because you're speaking the wrong direction. And my advice is to a lot of baby boomer pastors. I know there's a lot of them. They have done a lot of awesome job, reformed, or Pentecostal, charismatic, whatever side of the theological sphere. Is you need to understand this generation is a social justice warrior, and it's not a bad thing. They're really interested in the dynamics and the mechanics of identity and gender. What baby boomer considered not important, they consider really important. So we have to move on and get out of apologetics hat and study and get equipped to save the next generation, not by tolerating this sin, but by confronting the sin. And we are seeing so many young people. Like we had gay people come to our church. And guess what? They were not gay. They were indoctrinated in school. They were not even gay. We had a few like trans, bisexual. And then it ended up they were going to the public school down the road. And their parents didn't even know what they were teaching them. So pastors need to realize this is not about love, tolerance, diversity, or empathy. It's actually about truth and wisdom and discernment and understanding that the LGBTQ movement is not an empathy love movement. It's a power movement. It's actually a Marxist movement. And it is indoctrinating kids from the bottom up. And if you truly want your church to have an impact, like people are like a lot of people, pastors, the progressive, they always message me, you're deceiving a lot of people. They always tell me you're political, you're deceiving people. I'm like, I'm not deceiving anybody. Young people want to hear the truth. Young people are so confused by your lovey-dovey messages or even well-intentioned gospel messages that are not directed to their actual circumstance. They're asking real life questions, and every single pastor, you have to go back to the textbook. Like, by the way, it didn't take me much after starting the LGBTQ movement. I was like, this is not about love. This is actually a religion. It's not just a religion, it's actually a counterfeit, anti gospel religion. Everything that we believe to be true, the LGBTQ sex religion, they believe the opposite, the total opposite. That's why we are always going to be in tension. And that is why this is literally the point of persecution to the Western church. It's not Muhammad or Islam or communism or fascism. It's actually going to be the LGBT movement.
Real
Because
quick, let me jump in one second because it's something you said, and I really think this is an important point, a really good point you made. There is a generational difference between, say, the boomer generation to Generation Z. I know many pastors, religious leaders, faithful men of God and women who have a way, a methodology, a strategy for trying to reach the culture, for trying to reach young people, and they intend and mean well, but they don't fully understand or appreciate the postmodernity, the divide in communication, the understanding of truth, law of non-contradiction, all those things. They're assuming that we're communicating this in the same language, in the same terms, with the same understanding. But right now, you go in as a pastor and you're talking to Gen Z who has undergone this indoctrination, you might as well be from Mars
you're
because they
from a
have
different
no
planet. You're a
understanding.
boomer. You're literally a boomer.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
why, by the way, politically, that is the reason Donald Trump ended up becoming extremely relevant and powerful. People don't understand. Donald Trump is really aware of what is happening on the ground. I encourage us pastors, please get off your mountain. And God has blessed you. You probably have a driver. You probably have a team that gives you everything. Stop getting reports from your team and actually go and talk to a young person. Like I have to, like I'm telling you, I went there because I went and talked to real young people, and I was like, these guys need help.
yes,
They
yeah.
need a loving father who will correct them, rebuke them, or even a God disciplined with a rod. Which means, look, Gen Z, I have the Donald Trump effect. I have a lot of people in my area that hate me. Like I walk on the street and people like when I order coffee in some places, they give me the wrong order because they don't like me. So
There you go. Yeah.
we ended up with the polarizing effect. We have young people that have said, you know what, I need to repent of my sin. But we also had young people who were saying, stuff you, I don't give a crap about you. And I have a whole, like, once I decided I'm going to actually preach the gospel and I'm going to address these issues, after the series, it was the first time we did our series in 2020. The intersection between culture, religion, church and state politics. We had pretty much from that moment onward, everybody went after us. Like we had a group, the LGBT community in our area. Like you go on Facebook right now, there's a group called Cancel Echo Church. A group with me, and they created the group with like 500 people from our area that hate me. So I walk on the street and we get these death stares from everybody. I had so many people from my family get fired. So we had that polarizing effect. I have 2,000 Gen Zers that hate me, but I also have hundreds of Gen Zers who actually repented of their sin. So the question now becomes, you're gonna have to make a decision. Like it's you can't again, we're not in Jerusalem. People need to understand young people are actually going to hell. It's not a joke. And particularly the homosexuality question. Like the Bible said, those who practice homosexuality will not inherit the kingdom of God. It's not a conspiracy. So when you have young people in your church and you're not actually addressing it, you're actually deceiving them. So it's not loving to do that. It's not loving when young people go to heaven and on the judgment seat of God and he tells them, get away from me, I never knew you. And then they will say, well, my pastor never told me. And trust me, we're not just in a post-truth generation. We're actually an anti-truth generation. We have actually moved beyond postmodernism to anti. So again, the baby boomers, they're trying to maintain 1970s and 1990s. I'm like, dude, it's finished. It's gone. It's dusted. Your own government lied to you about the effect of COVID and vaccine. Your own government believes men can get pregnant. Like, you have to stop believing the establishment, honestly. You have to, because the establishment is Babylon.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. Hey, just a final as we wrap up, because I want to mention this. You made a video, LGBTQ plus sex religion versus Christianity, gone viral. Really appreciate so much your ability in a very short medium like social media. Oftentimes you have to get messages out in like 60 seconds, 90 seconds. But talking about the differences just real quick between this sex religion that we have today versus
Yeah.
Christianity,
And
right?
that video
Yeah.
got me so much hate and tension. And it was nuts because two groups of people. Some people think I'm gay and I'm struggling with it. So I'm always talking about it. I'm like, no, I'm not. So that's one comment I get from people. But the other comment I get from people is you're trying to get attention. I'm like, no, you need to understand. The reason I did this, like, I was walking in Sydney. We had the Pride parade, and it was literally a few weeks before Easter. And I saw there was like a Pride flag every single pole, every single light pole. Everything was gay, like truck, fire, buildings, light, everything. And I looked around and I'm like, I was so mesmerized. Our government claims to not be religious, yet it celebrates pride and all corporations and Mardi Gras, which is our Australian version of it, everywhere. Yet when it comes to Easter, the Prime Minister didn't even go to church. And then I looked and I was like, it is obvious that we have replaced the cross, the symbol of love, to the pride flag as a symbol of love. It's obvious that there is a new religion rising and people are bowing down to it. And the people of God has to make a decision. Are you going to bow down to the LGBTQ sex religion? And that's the thing. The Western civilization is built around the cross. That is why we have the freedom fighters that went to the Anzacs in Australia. You got in America, the American troops. Every single war, it had a goal of that there is no greater love than to lay down yourself for someone else. And then I looked at the sex religion, and according to them, love is self-love. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, how did we manage to redefine love from the cross to a gay flag. The cross is a symbol of God becoming man. The gay flag is a symbol of man becoming God. The cross is a symbol of self denial. The LGBTQ sexual religion is a symbol of self love. The gospel is about being born again. The LGBTQ sex religion is about being born this way. The gospel is about being a sinner. The LGBTQ sex religion is about being perfect. The gospel is about repentance. The LGBTQ sex religion is about affirmation. And this is the big thing. God created us to worship Him and love people and use sex. The LGBTQ sex religion, it makes you love yourself, worship sex, and use people. And that is the reason it is direct opposite. So you end up with two holy pilgrimages. Easter, God becoming man, or Pride Month, man becoming God. Easter, which is you're literally celebrating humility. Somehow we celebrated humility with pride. And pride is not a virtue. Actually, pride is the essence of sin. In fact, what made the devil is his pride. The foundation of sin is pride. You will be just like God. This idea that I am so good, I'm so important, I'm so valuable. And people need to realize pride is the foundation of sin. How mind blowing. The devil is not even hiding it. It's in front of you. Pride month. Pride is the reason for sin. Pride is the root of sin. God, by the way, hates pride, and God resists the prideful, and the devil is the devil because of pride. So why are people participating in demonic religion of worshiping sex, and Christians affirming literally antichrist idea under the name of love and tolerance and empathy? I think Christians need to do the homework and apologetics and theology and get back and say, God, I want to worship you. Even if it means I'm going to get a worse job, I might get fined. I'm going to go through legal battles. I'm not going to be cool anymore. I'm not going to be culture accepted. You have to make the tough choice and let God reward you. By the way, the moment we did that, as I finish, we ended up with hate everywhere. Like, I opened that can and I did not even know what was about to happen. Like, people went nuts. But then, in the 3 years after, every single year, we look back and our church grew by 70 to 100% every single year. So there was persecution, but there was reward. And that's my advice. I'm like, you'll be persecuted, you'll be hated, but God will fill your church because Jesus is building a church and the gates of hell will not prevail. Yeah, thanks a
Amen,
lot, Ryan.
brother.
It's a bit of a
Thank you
long
so much for your
um,
time.
no worries.
Pastor Andrew Sedra of Echo Church,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for joining the Give Me Liberty podcast. God bless you. And folks, stick around
Thank you.
for final thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Give Me Liberty podcast. Please like and subscribe and share with a friend. Only a true friend can give the gift of the Give Me Liberty podcast. I really appreciate Andrew's testimony. Imagine escaping Egypt under Islamic persecution only to find yourself in a free country in the West that no longer champions the ideals of freedom, which include religious liberty. In many ways, Australia, like Canada and so many other countries that follow the British legal tradition, have a preset table of freedoms that include speech, religion, assembly, and press, but are subject to all sorts of legal limitations that do not make such liberties a fundamental or absolute right. What Andrew and so many other Christians in Australia are battling in this sexual revolution that includes sexual orientation and gender identity is now trying to overturn 2,000 years of the Christian tradition in order to establish soji as a premier right in Australia. Australia's anti-discrimination laws are there to flex federal power and force the agenda of the sexual revolution. America is truly unique in that we fought a revolution to secure our rights that first come from God and are recognized by the government. The losers of that revolution went on to build a great empire all around the world, and in their legal tradition set a precedent that was based on the divine right of kings, the British monarch, and governmental power. Yes, there are human rights, but these rights are granted by the sovereign, which in this case are vested fully with the crown and not the people. America has a sovereign too, but as our founders recognized, our sovereign is Almighty God, and his power was vested in the people, who then appoint representatives. A constitutional republic, if you can keep it. Please pray for religious freedom in Australia. Pray for this country too, that we would stand our ground as Christians, unapologetically, upholding the faith once for all delivered to the saints. We'll see you next time. Until then, God bless you.